Hey guys, this is Key, and welcome to another Key Creative Studio video to complement the videos on my blog, Key Creative Studio blogspot.com. I wanted to talk about proportions for the human figure, like what are the correct or ideal proportions for the human figure when figure drawing. The title is Proportions, Exaggeration, Personal Perspective, and Design. And I believe that all these factors are very, very important when doing figure drawing. It's not just a matter of doing exact, quote unquote, correct proportions all the time, but but sometimes even to exaggerate those proportions and also to give your own personal perspective, depending on the context of what you're drawing. So yeah, like what the hardest thing I've noticed in the drawing workshops that I do with some of the people who attend my workshops, that they have some difficulty getting down like the right proportions for the figure, and when they draw the model on the stage, for some reason it looks unbalanced, things look uneven, and things like that, and it's just basically because they really don't have they haven't acquired enough mileage to really have an intuitive sense of like what the average proportions for the human body are, and it takes time. You can learn it academically, which is yes, the average human being is about 7.5 heads high, but that will vary from ethnic group to ethnic group. And another thing that will play a determining factor in it is also, yes, your interpretation as the artist on the subject. You might want to um, exaggerate, or you might want to maybe accentuate, or even diminish certain um, proportions or attributes regarding the person's height or proportions. So let me just get into this. All right. So oops. So this is a I think a page from Successful Drawing, maybe by Andrew Loomis. Well, it's Andrew Loomis. I'm not sure which book it's from, but Andrew Loomis was great illustrator and great illustration instructor from the 20th century. And here he has the average person measuring in at or a normal person measuring in at 7.5 heads high, which he has in parentheses like rather dumpy, but quite frankly, that's the average person like you'll see on the street, in I think in any country, quite frankly. People in Japan, I think, usually measure somewhere between like 7 heads high or 6.5 heads high. But this is what you'll see normally, generally. An idealistic person is measuring here at 8 heads. And we mean by idealistic, well, we think of an ideal person, someone who looks maybe a little bit taller than average. Someone who's well is attractive. It's sad to say, and it seems to be a universal fact that people who are a little bit taller do tend to attract attention more when they enter an area. Doesn't mean that they're better, but it does mean that they do attract attention, and they do tend to be appealing to people. You notice here for fashion and heroic that they're measuring at 8.5 heads and even 9 heads for the Greek looking hero on the end. Well, yeah, I mean it's these proportions are by design for the need of how they're going to be used. In a fashion magazine, you notice that people are generally taller, right? If you were a fashion designer, or if you were you were a manufacturer of fashion clothes, you want to advertise your brand with people who don't look ordinary and frumpy like the average person, because it's just simply it's not as attractive to people. However, if you did it with someone who was a little bit taller, yeah, people might be more inclined to look and to notice your models, therefore noticing the clothes that they're wearing, therefore, having more interest in what you're trying to get across to them. Heroic is 9 heads, and of course, that is something that is we're talking about superhuman proportions at this point now. But that is the whole point, that when you're talking about like heroic characters, whether it's in fantasy or some, I don't know, some epic story, yes, we want to create a sense of high drama, epic drama, and experiences that are larger than life. So 9 heads is what you'll see normally, like say like in comic books and things of that nature. This is Reed Richards from Marvel Comics, uh, the Fantastic Four, and this is a page from How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way by John Buscema. This illustration is by John Buscema, and here he has Reed Richards at 8 and 3/4 heads high. Now, Reed Richards is not a superhero human by the measure, let's say, like he's a Superman where he's like lifting buildings and like throwing cars and things like that. He's supposed to be just like an average man in terms of his physical build and ability. However, he's a scientist and he does get into these larger than life adventures. So, the artist John Buscema designed him to look like a man of action, even though he's not a super guy, but he looks like someone who is up for the task, for tasks that are beyond what everyday people experience. This is his wife in the comic book. Her name is Sue Richards, and even though she's supposed to be kind of like a housewife, she too, she has yeah, beyond idealistic and almost like heroic proportions for a woman. She's 8 and 3/4 heads high as well. Um, this is a character named the Kingpin, also from Marvel Comics, and he is measuring here, I think, at maybe like 5.5 or 5 1/4 heads high, and but he's not a short guy. I mean, he's supposed to be 2 meters high. Now imagine someone who is 2 meters high, but they measure only 5 heads in height. Imagine how massive that person is. Imagine how powerful that person is, right? So when you make the proportions more squat by design, it does imply a sense of power and strength sometimes. Of course, when the figure, of course, is by measure tall as or taller than the average person. Okay. Um, Going on ahead here. Oh, this is a illustration from Bill St Cabbage. Really great artist. I highly recommend looking at his stuff. And every time he does a figure, he always designs it in a way that it makes a statement about his interpretation of the character. The Kingpin in Marvel Comics is supposed to be this massive, massive, larger than life character. Um, Massive in terms of his strength and also massive in terms of his influence. I mean, and look how he's like designed him so he's touching both sides of the frame at the same time. He's so large. He's almost filling up the entire frame with his entire body. But that is a that's a statement from the artist. It's an editorial statement from the artist and saying like this is a powerful man. He's so large that like his back is actually it's yeah, it's like this tidal wave that's coming over his head. It's cartoonish in a way, but it's very effective to to show his power and size. And quite frankly, we don't have to be as extreme as Sienkiewicz is here, but we can tone it down a little bit and still stay in the realm of like beyond normal, and still get the point across. Like if you see here, this is also the Kingpin, but this is the Kingpin from the movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And this is definitely, it was taken directly from, directly inspired by Bill Sienkiewicz's design. However, they toned it down a little bit, but he's quite massive. And I don't know, maybe he's standing here at maybe, who knows, maybe like maybe 9.5 heads high, maybe 10, possibly, right? But obviously, it was done, to make a statement about the character. Let me go on ahead here. So, oh, here. Um, this is Mickey Mouse, of course. And Mickey generally he measures about I think usually about like three heads high, maybe three and a couple of bits over. It depends on the artist, but usually not much more than 3 heads high. And that was done deliberately because Mickey Mouse is supposed to be quite a non-aggressive and boyish kind of character. And well, three heads high, essentially we're talking about the proportions of a child here, and that's what comes across, when we see the character. You also could see here that Donald is also 3 heads high, but you can notice that his head is noticeably smaller than Mickey's, right? So Goofy is a little bit taller. Goofy measures at about 5.5 heads high. And technically speaking, Goofy is not supposed to be a dog, even though he looks like a dog. He has ears like a dog and a nose like a dog. But he's supposed to be a human being. He's supposed to be a caricature of a human being. Um, the caricature of human folly, so to speak. But you'll see that measurement for human-like characters at Disney's, they usually measure at 5.5 heads high. Actually, quite frankly, if you look at any Disney princess or almost any like straight Disney human character, most of the time they're going to measure about 5.5 heads high, unless if it's a character that's very 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 caricatured. Actually, let me go on ahead and that's some Loomis there. Uh, yeah, I guess I can use this one. So this is from Peter Pan, and yeah, you can notice that like the parents, the Mr. and Mrs. Darling, they're measuring about 5.5 heads high apiece, but obviously, and also Wendy is also 5.5 heads high, but notice how each of their heads are different in size. So obviously, when Wendy is a little girl, so her head is going to be smaller, smaller than her mother's, and definitely smaller than her father's. Um, and also, notice the father's feet. Notice how small they are. It's almost like his feet. They taper down into these little, these pin-like feet at the bottom almost. But that is done by design. The average human being's, the length of the average human being's head is about the same length as their feet and their hands. But we can exaggerate uh, the size of the hands and feet for effect. Making his feet small actually makes his upper body strength or his upper body look larger. Right now, he's not a bodybuilder. He's not an athlete, but he definitely he is a powerful man, and it does give a sense of that he's a patriarch, and leader here of the family, right? So um, this is Bob Mcguinness. Bob Mcguinness was the artist who did all the James Bond 007 posters with Sean Connery back in the 60s. And he's great. He does these very very beautiful women. Of course, he's this is the poster for Breakfast at Tiffany's. Um, we all know Audrey Hepburn. We all love Audrey Hepburn. But I think if if you have a monocle knowledge about Audrey Hepburn, we all know that Audrey Hepburn was not a very tall woman But you can see what he's done here by lengthening her legs out like that, and lengthening her arms out to make her look more elegant and more statuesque, for effect. And he did that deliberately. I mean, if you look at his work, I mean, some of his women, some of them are even more than 8 heads high. The legs get really crazy sometimes. They're almost like spider-like sometimes. But he does it in a way that it's very, very appealing. Okay, this is also Bob Mcguinness as well. Yeah, it's Bob Mcguinness. So he tends to he tends to make the legs a little bit longer and a little bit thinner on the women. Also, making the legs thinner also does makes create a sense of lengthening out the character, or particularly if it's a female or a male for that matter, actually. This is also a model sheet from Disney, and if you look at John Smith, Pocahontas, and Pocahontas' father Powhatan, you notice that they all are about 5.5 heads high, and yeah, I mean they're designed to be straight characters, but notice the proportion between them and also between the other characters. Let's say like Ratcliffe. Look how massive the center of his body is, and his head is pretty large too. He's probably measuring maybe about 5.5 heads high, but he looks like a very, very huge and massive person. Look, I don't want to get too long-winded about this, but I wanted to really show you an example like why it might be useful to take some liberties um, when you're drawing your characters here. So this is Alex Ross. It's illustration. It's a Star Wars illustration of Luke Skywalker from Star Wars. I think he has this character measuring about maybe like 8 heads high. Now, of course, Luke Skywalker is the hero of Star Wars. He's the center of this great epic soap opera. And yes, he's supposed to be larger than life. And so it was done, deliberately. So, if Alex Ross was to take it literally, because the actor who plays him, Mark Hamill, he looks more like that. Well, actually, that's not more like that. That's what he looks like. And Mark Hamill, he's about 6.5 heads high. He's not a tall guy, but he is the hero of the story. Now, one could, render him like that, but it might not be quite as exciting as unless like if he was rendered like that. This was done for dramatic effect, obviously, So if he was to be a slave to the proportions of the actual actor as he's seen on film, he might be taking away from the sense of drama based around the character. So anyway, that is just a little bit of advice for you guys in terms of what to keep in mind when drawing your characters. I do recommend taking a look at Andrew Loomis's work. Yes, try to get in the habit of like measuring out your figures, when you draw them, but don't be a slave to it. Just have a good understanding about like what the average proportions are, and then when you get good at it, then you can take it to the next step and start designing. Start making them longer or make it even shorter, depending on what your feeling is about the character. Okay, all right. I hope that was helpful for you guys, and I'll be back with more in the future. All right, take care. Bye bye.